Hello, and welcome to the Curious Cult podcast, the show where I talk to incredible people about their fascinating curiosity. I am your obsessively curious host, Nick Haralambous, and in this episode, I talk to Erik Hersman about boredom, a business model for innovation, and how to bring Wi-Fi to emerging markets in rugged conditions. Erik is one of my favorite people in tech. He's the co-founder of Ushahidi, the iHub in Kenya, and most recently, Brick.com. Erik, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
Cool. Why don't you kick us off by telling the listeners who you are in your own words?
Yeah, sure. My name's Erik Hersman. I'm the CEO of Brick and have done a bunch of tech stuff here in East Africa over the years. Father of a couple girls and just happily living my life here in Nairobi. Well, kind of
Cool.
locked down here in Nairobi anyway with the coronavirus.
Yeah, no doubt. I do love how you say you've done some things in tech in East Africa. It's a very cool way of glancing over the last decade of achievements, but we'll get more into that as we go. So you read the questions that I sent through, and you highlighted one in particular that I'm going to start off with. And generally, curiosity is not the most immediately efficient way to kind of do anything, to promote change or to be innovative, but it's proving to be a very good way of doing it if you're willing to take the time. So the question is, do you allow yourself time to like wonder and do nothing and just think about the world?
Yeah, it's a great question, Nick. I mean, I do, right? And I wish I did more, but I definitely do it. And it's one of those, the reasons why is because almost every good enough idea that I've had that has become a business has come from a time where I've sat and done nothing and been so bored that I start just letting my mind wander over certain things. There's a great quote by a lady named Dorothy Parker, which states the cure for boredom is curiosity. There is no cure for curiosity. And I think that's true, right? Um, in this world today, we often are so busy, and even when we're not supposed to be busy, we're busy because we have that little device in our pockets, and there's always something to do. And so, like finding an excuse to not do things um, is great, and I think that we don't obviously think through that too much, and we don't make space for it.
Absolutely agree. You did mention to me something along the lines of boredom. You were speaking at a conference about boredom. I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah. Sorry, I forgot about that.
No,
So
that's
yeah,
great.
the so I was invited to this conference last year, and usually when I'm invited to a conference, it's always about to speak about the same things I normally speak about. So tech in Africa, innovation in tech in Africa, or what I've been building, whatever. And and this time was just like, yeah, we think you might have some good things to say. Why don't you just come and speak about whatever is interesting to you? And I was like, oh, okay. Well, I don't often get a chance to just have a blank kind of canvas to paint on for a talk. So I just sat back and thought about it and thought about it for a little while. Um, and this is called the Do Lectures. It takes place in Wales. It's a small conference, 150 people. You stay in yurts and tents out in the grass, and it's
Awesome.
fantastic. They do a great job of it. Um, what I was thinking about is like, where do ideas come from? For me, anyway. And I started to think about that idea of where I have space and I have some time to think. And I think back to even Brick, the company, I started a number of years back and run today. And it started because after a conversation in Cape Town, uh, I was with Hank Kleinehans from Skyrove. I was sitting on the airplane thinking, if we were to design a router made for Africa, what would it be like? And my phone was dead, my computer was dead. I had packed my book in my bag, and it was not available to me, so I didn't have anything to do. And I sat there for the next 4 hours and started sketching in my notebook about what this thing would look like, what would it need to do, just kind of thinking through that the whole time, and just kind of like I didn't know enough about routers to know what I was doing or was right or wrong,
Mm.
but just thinking through it. And that time of kind of curiosity of letting my mind wander across a couple pages allowed me to think through something that was different and was unique. And by the time I landed in Nairobi, I had an idea and said, "Hey guys, anybody want to help me make something of this?" And that was the beginnings of Brick.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting story that perfectly leads me to one of my favorite questions on this podcast, and a question that I get asked a lot in a different context. The question that I get asked a lot is, how do entrepreneurs know when they should walk away from an idea? Like, when is it dead? Because, we've all got this glass half full approach to the world. My version of this question to people like you is, how do you know what curiosity to double down on and turn into a business? I mean, guys like you, investor, entrepreneur with lots of history and a thick network, you must get approached all the time and have hundreds of your own ideas. Which ones do you go, okay, cool, I want to learn more about routers in the emerging markets?
Yeah, it's a great question. That's a really hard one. I have more ideas than I think there are days in the week, uh, but I don't act on them all. And I think that's often the case for a lot of entrepreneurs is you have a ton of ideas, and it's what do you say no to as much as what do you say yes to. But the why of what do you say yes to, for me, it's very driven by, first of all, do I enjoy it? There's a lot of things I come up with, but I wouldn't enjoy doing it. Number two, is there actually some type of market demand for this thing? Is this something that
Mm.
people besides me are interested in? And I try and socialize the idea quite a bit. I'm not very secretive about my ideas. I talk to people, talk to people, talk to people, and I try and understand and suss from their reactions if this is something that's actually viable for the next stage. And then after I've done the next stage, I go and socialize it to a wider circle, and then and go through that process. And so I might have, I don't know, 2 to 4 ongoing anytime ideas that I'm circulating, and then depending on what happens, I'll either kill that or I'll move on with something.
Yeah, such a great point that you raised around socializing your ideas and your thinking. I think that so many young or first time entrepreneurs are so protective over their ideas, and they don't realize with the battery of experience that ideas are worthless. And that, the more you talk about them, the more refined they get, and the more likely you are to build them because it's out in the world.
Well,
Protecting your ideas doesn't help you.
yeah, exactly. It doesn't. I mean, ideas are not as unique as you think. Well, I'm actually curious about this with you, Nick, because I've been watching you for many years. Like, how do you suss through the ideas?
I've realized, and this is very honest, I've realized that I'm really bad at curating what ideas are worth something in the world versus what ideas are just interesting to me. You know that I built a sock company for
Hmm.
too many years. That was a fun business, but it wasn't actually, it was more of a rebound business for me. I've had more businesses than I've had partners in my personal life. So like
Hmm.
for me, it was a rebound business, right? And it's something that I didn't have the macro view to look at this idea and go, actually, this isn't the thing I want to spend 7 years building. At that point, I'd married the idea. I was too committed to the concepts. And luckily, my life partner, who was also my business partner, she shook it out of me and said, hold on, though, is this working? Like, is this something we should do? And then we analyzed it. So historically, I've been bad at it. What I'm trying really hard to do right now is exactly what you mentioned. What is the market opportunity? Do other people share this need? And do I want to do this for the next 3 to 5 years? Because I've realized I'm a 0 to 1 guy. I don't want to do something for 5 to 20 years. I want to do it for 0 to 5 years.
That's it. That last point I think is really interesting. It's interesting for me to think about that as well, which is, do you want to do this thing for 7 plus years? That's exactly how
Yes.
long we've been at it with Brick. And so I'm at
Yes.
7 years, and I'm looking at this whole thing. I'm saying, what's still interesting to me? Sure, we've
Mm,
created the hardware, we created the software, we have the most innovative business model in the world for internet. But is it something I want to keep doing? And is there something still
yeah.
interesting about it? And for me, there is. I found that there is. There's things in it that I find really compelling. And but it's I think it's hard uh, as an entrepreneur to figure out what do you do once things become operational.
Yeah, I am interested in finding out a little bit more about Brick for our listeners because I'm fascinated by the business and I actually can't believe it's been 7 years already. It's BRCK Brick, and
Yeah, we
then if you could tell us a bit about it.
Yeah, that's right. It's BRCK. Who couldn't afford the I, and I mean that quite. I mean, I mean that quite literally. There's too many masonry companies, and so all of the things that had to do with BRICK were taken by these cement or masonry companies. And so I finally found a guy that had BRCK, and so we were negotiating the price of this URL, and and it was ridiculously expensive. Um, and I was like, "There's no way I'm spending that much money." And then my business partner at the time, because I was in Ushahidi,
Yeah.
Juliana was at a conference, and I was with our other business partner, David Kobia, in Atlanta of all places, and we see that she was at I think like the All Things Digital conference or whatever, All Things D, and
Yeah.
had mentioned the name, so it was actually now out in public for the first time. It showed up in a news thing, like on the Wall Street Journal. I was like, oh my goodness, David. And so we quickly bought the URL, and we're like, whatever the guy's price is now what we got to do. So we just bought the stupid thing and went away with it. But yeah, it was expensive. But anyhow, long story. But the
Great
interesting
story.
thing, yeah, about Brick was that first it started off with this idea of like, how could we make the most rugged router for internet in Africa, so that it could just
Mm.
always work. And it was the idea that the power always goes out, and we also use a lot of SIM cards for connectivity, not just Ethernet cables.
Mhm.
And so, what would it look like if you did that? How would you have backup power in it, and all these other redundancies? So we built it and we shipped it to 50 plus countries around the world. And then we realized that we weren't actually solving the bigger problem. The bigger problem was, how do you get people online? And
Mm.
and they're like, oh, okay, well, how do we do that? So this is I think where curiosity plays a great role in business, which is you sit there
Mhm.
and you look at your stuff and you say, oh, okay, well, it's not working. What do we need to do? This is a linear business. It's not a high growth business. So what do we do,
Mm.
right? And when you're fixating on these problems, you can go a couple different ways. One of those ways is to ask why, and then start digging down into that. And that's a great, fertile ground for curiosity and for um, just experiments and trying new things. Out of that came what we do today, which is Mojo Wi-Fi, which is we leverage
Okay.
basically our hardware to deploy free public Wi-Fi hotspots all over Kenya and Rwanda. We have right now 2,700 hotspots. We have about 1 million monthly active users, and
Mm.
it's the largest public Wi-Fi in, I think, the continent. Maybe there's something bigger in South
And,
Africa, but
and are you
it's pretty big.
deploying these Wi-Fi networks with your brick router?
We do both. So we do when
Okay.
we do them in public transportation, is where half of the network is, which is
Hmm.
really, really, really hard to do anywhere. So it's like your taxis in South Africa, our
Yeah.
matatus in Kenya, the buses in Rwanda, and it's really hard to do because you know the environment is very, very harsh on technology, and
Yeah.
so by building our super brick, which is this extremely ruggedized micro server, if you will, we can put both content and connectivity into those vehicles and keep it going, even as it rattles across dirt roads or speed bumps or whatever it is, and it just keeps going and going. And then the other half of the network is a fixed network, which we take off the shelf hardware for, and we use our Moja software platform to run on top of it. And so yeah, it's working, but it took us a long time to figure out.
So interesting. So, I mean, this is obviously a really innovative and interesting business in the emerging markets and globally. So, the question I want to jump to now is around your idea of innovation. So, off the back of this research that I'm doing for my book, one of the things that I think people are struggling with is everyone has a different idea of what innovation is, and everyone uses it in a different context. So, it's become kind of meaningless. So, I'm curious about your context for innovation. Being in East Africa, there's so many different things that you can see that other people don't see. What is innovation to you?
Well, I think this is such a great word for me because, and I'm thankful that you didn't bring up the fact that I started the innovation hub in Nairobi. The
I
the
did
large,
not.
the largest tech hub on the continent, right, for many years.
Hmm.
And that innovation has become this. Even probably by the time I did that in 2010, it was already a buzzword. But the
Yeah.
yeah, innovation is a curious word to unpack because it means so many things to different people. For me, it's about iteration. It really is. There's always some type of invention in there as well, but oftentimes it's just iteration on ideas. Innovating is kind of coming up with new ways to do old things. And when I think about it in the East Africa context, I think, especially when it comes to technology, the way I think about it is innovation really plays out in the business models more than the tech. We tend to use the older tech from the rest of the world. We don't have the centers of science and the R&D facilities at universities to kind of put us ahead of the rest of the pack with new tech. So what we do is we take the older tech and we while the rest of the world moves on from that quite quickly, we keep digging deeper into it and doing things that
Mm.
most other people aren't thinking about. So that's where like M-Pesa came from, right? This idea of using
Mm.
USSD, a very old tech that came out in the kind of 80s for cell phone towers, for the people who work on cell phone towers to kind of uh, query the system, and
Yeah.
now it's being used for the largest mobile payments in the world. Where Ushahidi
Yeah.
started using SMS for crisis and disaster response. Yes, we could have used Android
Mm.
apps or some other thing, but it was just old tech that people had in their pocket already. The same thing
Mm.
applies, I think, to a lot of the new stuff you see, which is like people are saying, okay, that's fine. And now it's Android apps, or it might be another SMS or USSD service, or it could be just a normal computer app for schools administrators to run their programs. Like we're using older tech, but we're doing it in new ways, and I think that's what's exciting about innovation is that we're seeing it applied in the business model very often. And what it does is allows this is okay. This is actually a really important point.
Mm.
Oftentimes in business, especially in East Africa, I won't speak for the whole continent. There's a lot of gatekeepers, and if you can get into something that doesn't have a lot of gatekeepers, you can move forward quite in quite interesting ways. And technology
Mm.
is that kind of key that unlocks it for the youth of the continent to be able to say, oh, I can do something, and it can fit in this older paradigm, but with a new business model. And this kind of silver bullet is the technology that allows us to have some new efficiency in the system.
Mm.
And so it's small innovations that don't necessarily mean they can't they might not be worth more than a couple paragraphs in a chapter of a book, but they because they affect so many people, they can have this outstanding effect across a whole society. And so innovation in its very mundane and boring ways is sometimes the most exciting of it. So I got a
Yeah.
question for you
This.
though, or a thought
Yeah.
for you.
Sure.
Um, so, like, I was thinking about your questions around curiosity, and I'd like to just bounce something off you. Just like I was thinking about, there's two things about curiosity, or two ways of thinking about curiosity for me, and
Hmm.
I'd like to hear what you say about this. I think about the curiosity of creating things, and then there's the curiosity of will it work. What type of
Okay.
curiosity is it that you're digging into here?
In my experience of so far 14 episodes on this podcast, I think that those two are intrinsically tied because people who are curious about the idea of creating something want to then get it out into the world. And whether that's building a business or writing a book that millions of people see or creating this new innovation on top of old technology, the people who are obsessively curious about a solution to a problem want that problem to actually be solved. So I'm researching both because for me, they're intrinsically tied. And I think the entire nature of the book that I'm going to publish is going to illustrate that there are people in the world who want to solve a problem regardless of what they have to go through to do that. And it is an obsession. I mean, from the outside, Eric, just looking at your last 15 years, you are obsessively curious about solving problems that the emerging markets have. There's nothing that anyone can do to stop you from creatively coming up with the solutions and then turning them into businesses, either that you run or that someone else runs for you. I think that they're completely together. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And I think there's different types of people, right? Too, which is like there's people who just love making things, right?
Yes.
And figuring out how they work and everything like that. And then there's the others who are say I have the curiosity of will it work? And I agree.
Mm.
There's definitely people who combine the two. Um, and uh, I think for me, I maybe do tie both of those together a little bit in how I
Mm.
think and do things. But I work with a lot of people who are one or the other. And maybe that's the difference between
Mm.
the leaders of organizations who are thinking strategically. more than the employees who just have one or two things they have to focus in on. It's just I don't
Yeah.
even know if I have an answer for it. I just something I because of your questions I
It's
started to noodle around a little
No,
bit.
it's a great observation. And having just rewatched Michael Fassbender's version of the Steve Jobs story,
Oh yeah.
I think Jobs and Woz are the perfect example of what you're saying. Woz is how things work, and Jobs is will this work? And they just needed each other. That whole movie was basically a story of their relationship, that
Hmm.
they needed each other to build something as globally effective as they could. On their own, they both flailed. And I think that maybe in your life, you probably found this too, that you and Juliana, you've worked well together because you have complementary curiosities. One is how, and one is will, and maybe one is why. And you gravitate towards these kinds of people. And it's actually a skill that I think that we've had to learn, is how to gravitate towards the right kind of people.
Yeah, and it's hard because in more and more we live in this filter bubble, right? Where whether you're
Ah,
online or it kind of directs you in socially to the people you that algorithm think that you should like. And so
yeah,
what you need to do sometimes is be attracted to the people who have strengths or uh, interests that you don't share. And from
absolutely.
that comes some magic.
Absolutely. I want to dig a little bit deeper into the old tech into something new and innovative. And you said that you're seeing younger people not needing gatekeepers to then expose this tech to the world. And I love that. I think that sums up South African and maybe Eastern African innovation and business building so well, that there are so many gatekeepers that we look for old tech to do new things with. My question is, what kinds of people are you seeing do these sorts of things? And that refers to the idea that is this a nature nurture kind of curiosity? Are there always curious people in every market? Or have you seen more interested, curious people from certain places that do certain things?
Oh, that's a tough one. And it's tough because I think it plays out differently in different people. I've seen thousands of people come through, like when I was running the iHub for,
Mm,
2010 to 2013, 14-ish. And the interesting thing about that time was seeing that, so there's definitely, get this university level kid who's come through and they're just hell bent on trying to, they've got this new tech they've been playing with and they're trying to find a problem to
mm,
solve with it. And then there's the guy who's been sitting at the bank for the last 10 years and he's like, oh, I know the problem now,
mm,
and
yeah.
all of a sudden he says, okay, let me step away from the bank and start something and I know how to solve the niche in this
Yeah.
niche problem, this industry. And um and so it kind of comes in those two flavors to me, where there's sometimes some of the most interesting innovative stuff comes from people who have no idea what they're doing because they have no idea what they're doing. Then the other
Mm,
ones come from the people who really really know what they're doing, right? And those two
yeah.
polar opposites, um, are both innovative. They both are driven by
Absolutely.
this desire to do something and change the status quo in some way. They are the
Mm,
edges. But from those edges, you get very different personality types, very different ways of running businesses, different levels of experience, obviously, and so the
mm.
companies vary drastically between the two.
Okay, interesting. So now I want to talk a little bit about your kids. So obviously you're a very curious person, and watching you over the last 10 or so years and following your Instagram, you have a lot of interesting hobbies. So you don't just work. You do lots of things that provoke lots of different experiences for you and your kids. So is that kind of how you promote curiosity in them? And do you nurture it? Like, where does it come from when you look at them?
Yeah, I wasn't expecting that question. So yeah, I've got three girls, 14, 16, 18 now. And it's yeah, when you look at them, it's there's definitely curiosity in everybody, I think. And
Mm,
it either gets I think it gets directed into the things that you tend to care about or do well at. Some people just, like the praise of things. So, sometimes it can be because people are good at things. But
mm,
what I've seen though, while each of the three are curious, there's one that's much more curious than the others, and will
okay.
just dig into stuff. Will go out of her way to go and find new things and say, "Oh, well, wait. So how do you make chili? okay. And
Okay.
then we'll go and buy the chilies and then buy the,
Yeah.
everything else and then make chili. That, well, that wasn't very good. Let me make a different one.
No,
And
I know
then,
what you mean. Yeah.
and then the next one would be like, okay, well, then she'll be like, well, okay, so I'll be out there doing some metalworking. One of my hobbies is, metalworking, doing bladesmithing and stuff like that. And she's out there with me trying to design something. And then the others will come and pitch in and make their own. But then she'll be out there saying, okay, but yeah, but Dad, before we get to this metal stock, how do we smelt it so that we can get to metal?
Hmm.
And I'll be like, let me go look that up. And then, so I'll have to go look it up, and then we'll figure out how to make our own, smelting apparatus in the backyard, in our backyard furnace. And, I'll end up carting different equipment from across the world so that we can do it properly.
Hmm.
So
Wow.
yeah, I think it's part of it's very much, it's part of everyone. It's
Hmm.
then encouraged by those around them. Obviously, parents play a large role in just allowing that curiosity to flourish. Um, but I don't. I would say that, so it's from what I've seen, and again, this is just anecdotal, right? It's um, natural in everybody, but through, in some, it's more deep naturally too.
Hmm. Cool. And then the obvious next jump is when you were a kid, were you considered a curious child by the people around you?
Yeah, I tended to do a lot of. I'm I end up being a person who does things. I make things. I build things, and so I needed to understand how to build things. So I had to take things apart to understand how the little motor worked, or the I, I, I wanted to, like, one of my, I remember maybe I was like 8 or 9 years old, and I had my first little kiosk that I set up out of an old crate. I tipped over and cut a hole in and sold gum to the neighborhood kids in here in
That's
Nairobi.
amazing.
And like there's like this idea of like, how does that work? Can I do it too? Um, I
Mm.
remember, sitting in the schoolyard, out on the football pitch, actually, sitting there with one of my friends, and we had all these different components of different electric motors, and we were trying to figure out how could we make, something that we had seen in Star Wars or something like that. Like, we are trying to figure out, okay, what could we do? How could we make these motors work properly to make the legs move like this, or how fast does this need to spin, and all these different things. And so yeah, there's that curiosity about how things work, and then from that, what can you do with it, though? I guess I'd never make a good researcher, because I do care enough about, I want to figure out how it works, but then I want to do something with
Yeah, I think I also embody the statement that when you know just enough to be dangerous,
it.
just enough so you can go and build something that'll break or explode. That's me.
Yeah, exactly.
So, moving on, I'm quite interested in just uncovering a little bit more about the way you build businesses in relation to curiosity. Is it something specifically that you kind of seek out in co-founders and employees that you bring into your projects? I mean, Brick, you definitely need people who are curious and hungry to solve a problem, but are you specifically hiring for it and promoting it in your organizations?
Uh, so we don't actually. When I saw that question, I realized that's something we don't specifically look for. Um, Maybe we attract it naturally because of the type of company we
Mm,
are, but it's not something we've ever looked for. Like, I tend to look for people who are very hungry yet also humble,
mm,
who work hard but get things done, things like that. And I also look for very smart people so they can figure things out.
mm,
But yeah, curiosity is not. It hasn't been one of the things I've specifically looked for. However, especially with Brick, it's really, it was an R&D lab. That's how we started, right? That was what it was. It was
mm,
like coming up with these things. So people were sitting there trying to problem solve and come up with new things around. Like, everybody was doing something new for the first time, whether you were the firmware engineer, the hardware engineer, the electrical engineer, whatever it was.
mm,
You were trying to figure out something that nobody, at least in our part of the world, had done before, and you were trying to do it in ways that could be done here,
yeah.
not overseas. So it could, by its nature, it's self-selected for the certain type of people. And then I guess that's probably stuck with us over the years. And maybe one of the biggest pivots was about, I guess it was 2.5, 3 years ago. we had to kind of restructure the organization and change things so that it was business driven instead of just kind of R&D and tech driven. And
Mm.
that was the kind of internally the biggest pivot for us, was saying, guys, we cannot just be a place where R&D happens and we come up with the coolest stuff. We actually have to make a business of this. And let business drive some of this decision making. And so it's been a journey. One of the things that comes to mind though is when I think about curiosity in the business space, it, maybe it comes curiosity comes to me most in asking why. Because a lot of times
Mhm.
you're told in business, and you've dealt with this, whether it's a sock company or whether you're one of the other entrepreneurial efforts, right? Which is, people say, well, you need to do this. You're like, as an entrepreneur, you're sitting there saying, but yeah, but why? Like, why would I do that?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And it could be everything from how do you set up your bookkeeping to why you need to be in this market versus that market. And you're like, but why? And I think that's where there's a certain amount of kind of the rebel part of being an entrepreneur comes into play, saying, well,
Mm.
convince me why I should do it just like everybody else, and a curiosity is saying, well, what other way is there to do it?
That's for me quite closely tied to the idea, and I just want to keep going with Brick and this kind of R&D business into a more profit-driven business. Failure is a very big part of R&D. It's a big part of science. It's a big part of building businesses. And in my opinion, it's a huge part of curiosity and innovation. And specifically, if you don't have a corporate culture or a business culture that allows for failure, you more than likely won't find people who are curious and innovative being attracted to your business. So how does Brick kind of deal with this idea of failure, especially in that I was one of the questions I wrote down while you were talking is budget must be a big problem when you're doing R&D because you have a finite amount of money to find a solution that will make you money.
Yeah, so I don't think about it as failure, and I think this comes from something I learned running the iHub too. Is when you speak about failure in a society like what we have or in East Africa, um, it doesn't go over very well.
Yeah.
It's this kind of Western construct of fail fast
Yeah.
doesn't no no it doesn't necessarily apply. It doesn't sit well. Um,
Yeah.
we don't even have it built into our business systems. If you fail in a business in Kenya, and you go bankrupt, right? What are you actually are now prohibited from starting another business. You cannot be a
Wow.
director of another company, and that's it's like, so
Sheesh.
failure has a very strong uh, you know problem with the term itself,
Mm,
right? And then
mm,
there's a second level thing, which is, if you're some young person, you're coming out of university, your parents are expecting you to go to the best paying job you can get, and
mm,
and start paying back the family for having spent all that money to get you through college. And you're failure is very prevalent in entrepreneurship. Starting new
mm.
tech businesses happens, we have a high failure rate. So, you know, if you talk about failure there, you're also going to come up against problems. So instead,
Yeah.
we really started talking about experimentation. What you're doing is you're experimenting with
Ah,
different business models, different tech sometimes, to find the thing that works. And if you think about it as a part of a process, it's very different. You have a different mental model for what you're doing. Yes, technically, your experiment is failing, but it's through that experiment failing that you figure out what the right thing to do
mm,
is. So the same thing applies in Brick. I don't care if you fail at the thing. Make sure you're trying a lot of stuff. Maybe trying things that I wouldn't thought of, especially, and coming back with the answers and saying, well, we learned this, and so we're going to do this next. Okay, good. And let's do that fast, though. Let's do it rapidly. Let's not try and make big
mm.
projects. Let's do a lot of small experiments until we get to the right place.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've spent years trying to help South African entrepreneurs reframe failure. We see failure as an end point, and we should be seeing it as a through point. It's something
Absolutely.
that you have to get through. And when you get through it, you'll realize that it didn't kill you, and then you'll realize you're stronger, and then you'll keep building.
Well, and I think I don't know if you've ever failed in any of your businesses, but one of my first big businesses failed extravagantly for myself. I mean, it was a small business, but it was my first big thing that I had raised
Mm,
kind of family and friends money for, and it was through that. you realize that you can kind of hit the bottom, and you're still alive. It might suck,
Yeah.
but you're still alive. You're like, oh, I can deal with that. Yeah, I don't want to be here again, but I know, and now that I know what that looks like, it helps you kind of deal with that failure problem a little differently than the guy who's never done it before.
Absolutely. Yeah, I have 9 failures behind me from the age of 16 to 27.
So just one or two then.
Yeah, so I've been down that road. So you did mention graduates from tertiary education institutions. And I mean, I know that in the emerging markets, South Africa, Kenya, that's quite a big achievement. But I'm interested in your view on tertiary education and whether they promote kind of this free thinking curiosity that we believe. And the idea in my head here is Steve Jobs is famous for attending university but not being enrolled at any of the classes and just following his curiosity. What's your
Hmm.
view on tertiary education?
I think it's nice but not necessary. So
Okay.
what I mean by that is that I feel like it's nice because it gives the space for you to have a lot of ideas and a lot of different people to interact with. And
Hmm.
that's super valuable. This idea of being able to talk to people that don't agree with you, or university professors, or your classmates putting new ideas in front of you, and that's valuable because once you get into the business life, or just kind of ordinary life, whatever that happens to be, you end up often being siloed into things, and
Hmm.
and it's harder to get that experience. So I think that's why university is more important. It's important in some of the kind of research universities as well, because that's where you can go in and actually not just this theoretical approach to science or math or technology that we have in so many African universities, but actually practical versions of that
Hmm.
where people are actually testing new things out. That's a different thing entirely. If you're able to do that, that's great. It's maybe maybe very different than what we have in our reality here, though. So what I tend to tell people is, like, if you want to go off to university, you definitely should. Do I think you should go into an MBA? Mostly not. I don't. If you're
Yeah.
going onto your post grad, you got to have a really good reason for why. And I don't think a lot
Yeah.
of people do. I think they just want to get another degree. And
Yeah.
if they do have a good reason, it's like, yeah, good, go for it. But most of them, I've discouraged a lot of people from going down that route because when I asked them what they really wanted to do in life, it had nothing to do. That degree had nothing to do with it. It was just something that either
Yeah.
kept them busy or made somebody in their family happy.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we both stem from this school of building is that my MBA was when I was building my first 3 or 4 businesses between the ages of 16 and 21. And
Hmm.
that was how I learned about business management. Like that was it.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Like I learned so much. Like my first business failed because of my academic understanding of cash flow did not meet the
Mm.
practical world of cash flow. And so when
Ah,
I
interesting.
was in it, I was like, oh crap. Okay. And it was like too late. And I was like, okay, I guess this business is over. But
Yeah.
it was a real learning, right? And so from that understanding of how to deal with inventory and cash flow, it has helped me weather the storms of that at Brick, right? Where I do
Yeah.
understand what it means to have physical inventory and move it and deal with it and figure out distribution and all the, well, shoot, all the same things you had to do with socks, I have to do with routers.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's incredible that you can read about cash flow in a book, but until you're dealing with a supplier who you have to pay and someone who needs to pay you and they won't, there's nothing you can learn about in a book that will teach you how to manage that situation.
I wish there was more ways. I think you see this in certain like mechanical or electrical engineering. They still have this idea of kind of like, you understudy with somebody, um, and,
Mm,
and then you learn along the way. You do the thing with them, and you're seeing this person who's been doing and dealing with different types of plastic, 50 different types of plastics over the last 25 years. You know,
yeah.
she's teaching this new, gal about, okay, well, no, this is why you don't use that plastic. See? Okay, good. Now go use the
Mm,
plastic I told you to use the first time, right? And I wish we had that in business, and I wish we had that in other fields more, because I think that's actually much
yeah.
more valuable than just sitting in a classroom and listening to somebody. And maybe actually post coronavirus it'll be different because you're going to have to. I think the whole tertiary education system is going to change dramatically.
It's one of the gripes that I have with my upbringing is my family is filled with entrepreneurs, and in the typical Greek way of approaching it, they always wanted better for me, so they never
Hmm.
let me experience their own businesses, and they sent me off to go and get my degree so I could have a quote unquote better life than they had. So I never learned from them.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, no, no, so
Yeah.
yeah, you think about how where your family comes from and what they do, how does I mean, I come from a family of missionary linguists. That's why I'm in Africa, right?
Whoa.
So what they didn't understand business, they didn't do business, they didn't even own their own property.
Huh.
Like they had no, smart people. Obviously, if you're a linguist,
Yeah. Yeah.
you've been doing a lot of education. You're smart. You understand how to do translation, everything. But
Hmm.
nothing about business. And so, where do you get the experience
Yeah.
about to being an entrepreneur if you're coming from that kind of a family? Well, luckily for me, I went to boarding school, and my roommates were very entrepreneurial. They came from business
Ah.
families, and so we started doing entrepreneurial things in high school. And that kind of drove me towards this route. But it is
Yeah.
interesting how that nurture side of your
Mm.
your life does not just lend you towards curiosity or deepen it, as we were talking about earlier, but it also can adjust the way um, that you look at the world and what opportunities are available for you.
Absolutely. Perspective. I mean, you were saying that everyone is innately curious, but your unique perspective and context on where you take that curiosity is influenced by so many things. And I
Hmm.
suppose that's why the world is made the way it is.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think it's a really interesting conversation, especially since I've got kids too. Thinking about like one of the things for me. So when I was growing up, again went to boarding school. I got like it was like 15 equivalent of 15 US dollars per school term. That was my spending money,
Mhm.
and had to figure out how to make that last. So the way to make that last is you make more of it, right? You use that
Yes.
little bit and you try and make more, so you have more spending money. So but for my kids, they weren't going to boarding school. Yet I refused to give them an allowance, so they had to learn how
Mm.
to you know bake banana bread and sell it at the coffee shop and things like that to make money. And that just kind of, for me, it was more of saying, hey, you need to understand where this comes from, this thing money, and how do you create some type of value that somebody's willing to pay for. and and
Mm.
and that idea of building that early changes the way, like my kids are much like one of my daughters is so much more entrepreneurial than I ever was at 14, right?
Huh.
And I'm in probably more driven too. So I mean, if there's anybody in the family who has a has a chance to being very successful, it's her.
My next two questions are a couple of my favorites. What are you most curious about right now? And literally, that can be anything in the world.
I saw that question. I've been thinking about it for a week. Seriously, Nick. And I was like, what am I most curious about? Well, you've caught me in such a bad time because right now I'm dealing with the hustle of keeping the company really not just alive, but trying to grow it in
Mm.
maybe the worst economic slump that we're going to see in the whole
Yeah.
world, not just in East Africa, but globally for maybe a century. And
Yeah.
I'm just like, that's what's keeping me busy is actually just thinking about the business and how to. But
Yeah.
if there's anything that's curious about it, it's for me um, talking to the people who like so one of the things I'm trying to do is rapidly expand our network. We have basically a proven model, a proven capability, and I want to now rapidly expand it across Kenya and South Africa. Um,
Mm.
and so instead of covering just a million people, I want to cover 30 million people in the next 6 months. Very doable,
Wow.
right?
Yeah.
And how do you get the money for that? So the people who claim that they have a desire to see more people connected, so that they have information on coronavirus, or that they have, in our world, what we do is provide digital work, and that allows you to even use those points that you earn on our system to not just get online, but to actually go and
Mm.
buy bread with it, right? And so,
Mm.
like, you got this system that really works for where the world is going right now, and people sitting there hemming and hawing on where to put their money. I'm like, what,
Right here.
what? My curiosity is like, why is it so hard
Yeah.
for you to understand where this is going? And I think maybe that's probably maybe one of those. those frustrations that a lot of entrepreneurs have, which is when you're
Mm,
dealing with the financiers of the entrepreneurial world. The storytelling ability to get out the right message, the right story, because it's the best storytellers who win, right? So how do you get out the right story in order to do the expansion you need, or to sign the right partner, or to do whatever you need to do to attract the right
mm,
people for growth. And so my curiosity has been around, like, how do I crack this nut of communicating what's important?
mm.
And anyway, so that's one really lame answer for you, but it's really been
I
one
don't
that's
think
been on
so.
on my head for about a month
Yeah.
now.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And I do think that people in your position, with so much happening and with such a great ability to consume and to do a lot in a day, you don't notice that you're curious about so much stuff, but it's more of a necessity than it is this wondering curiosity. It still counts, though. Even if it's a necessity, it still counts.
Yeah, I haven't, I've had a couple days where I've not been deep, deep, deep into just, making everything work. But one of the
Mm,
things, okay, so one of the curiosity things I had for you, though, and it is platform related for me, because that even when my days that I'm not as deep into the money stuff as I am, um,
mhm,
most of the time, I still think about, like, what can we do? So I was actually sitting there thinking, I was like, okay, so hold on a second. I've got this thing that hits a million people, a month, and they're going to have less disposable income.
mhm,
If you're already living in that kind of low to median demographic, what do you need? Well, you need shelter, and then you need food,
mm,
right? Those are the two primary things.
mm,
You go back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. That's really what you need to
mm,
look at: safety and security, shelter, food, food and water. And I was like, oh, well, if we're the ones that are covering these people, and we can get them that free connectivity, what can we do for them? Like before, you'd been able
mm,
to. So the way our system works is that you get online by doing some type of digital work. You could be answering a survey question, it could be watching an ad, it could be training an AI. It doesn't matter. Some type of digital work. You earn
mhm.
points, and you can spend those points on either internet, or buying insurance, or premium content like TV shows and movies, whatever.
Okay.
And I was sitting there, I was like, well, hold on a second. Why couldn't we allow them to go to the closest store and buy Indomie noodles, or Unga
Mm,
corn flour, or whatever, like this necessities of living. And
mm,
so over the last 2 weeks, the team has rapidly shifted into saying, well, yeah, actually, we can do that. What we need to do is create a way for small business entities to be present on the platform, and then they can just pick
wow.
and do all this stuff. And so that the curiosity around that question drove into a very specific feature that I'm really excited about. It's actually the thing I'm most excited about around the platform that we've come up with in the last probably 6 months. So, um, you know, curiosity can drive you into specific things, and I guess maybe what crises do as well is they make you focus. It's like riding a motorcycle,
Mm.
which I I do every day. You When you're riding a motorcycle fast, you don't have the luxury of paying attention to everything that's happening on the sides. You have to kind of
Yeah.
your senses kind of notice some things that you don't even realize you're paying attention to, but really you're focusing what's in front of you. So the faster you go,
Mm,
the more you have to focus on what's in front of you and what's coming from out there. Same thing in a crisis in a business, right? You're moving fast, and you've got to focus. So all the extraneous activities have to decrease, so that
mm,
more of the company's senses are focused on the most important thing. And I think that's what's happening here, is that both on the network expansion and on the feature set that we're offering to our users, it's what is the most important? What is the thing that will actually matter to you in your life? And that's what we're doing.
that is an impressive and rare skill that entrepreneurs, in my experience, mostly struggle with, is saying no to everything to find the one true value proposition and then doubling down on that.
Well, it's hard for me too. I think it's hard for all of us. It's like, because
Yeah.
by nature we want to do it. We're like, oh yeah, shoot, we could do that, and that's a great idea too. And of course, my thing could work for that, right? And so like we always want
Yeah.
to do it. It's in our, it's just basically it's built into our DNA to want to try everything.
Eric, thank you so much for giving me your time. The last thing I'm going to ask of you is to tell my listeners where they can find and follow you, and if there's something you want to promote to them.
Probably Twitter is the easiest. So at White African, and you can find me on LinkedIn at Erik Hersman. I guess my thing I'd leave you with is not anything about the company or anything. I'd just say this, that there's a magic of getting lost or being bored in stillness, silence, and solitude. So allow yourself to find it. That's where curiosity sits.
Fantastic place to end. Thank you again for your time, and I look forward to seeing Brick's growth.
Awesome. Thanks a lot. Really appreciate it, Nick.
Thank you for listening to the Curious Cult podcast, the show where we talk to incredible people about their fascinating curiosity. If you like this episode, please rate the show, like it, share it, and generally be kind to us and tell people about it. My goal is to spark curiosity that changes the world, and you can help by talking about the show to anyone who will listen. Stay curious. Until next time.